May 3, 1917, northern France. An officer gives the order to attack. It's a simple, routine command. The kind French soldiers had followed thousands of times over 3 years of war. Nobody moves. Not one man, not out of fear, and not out of confusion. The entire division had simply, collectively, decided they were done attacking. Within weeks, the same thing was happening across more than half the French army on the Western Front. Last week, we looked at how armies build unbreakable bonds between soldiers on purpose. Today we're looking at the other side of that coin. What happens when that bond collapses? And something even stranger, real historical cases, where governments deliberately prevented that bond from forming in the first place, because they were afraid of exactly what it could do. When half an army simply stops. By the spring of 1917, the French army had already lost over 1 million men, killed since the war began. General Robert Nivelle promised something different, a single, decisive offensive that would finally break the German lines and end the war outright. French soldiers were told, explicitly, this attack would be the one that worked. It wasn't. The Nivelle Offensive inflicted roughly 134,000 French casualties. In its first days alone, for almost no territorial gain. Men who had been promised victory watched friends die for ground measured in meters. What happened next surprised everyone, including the French High Command. Soldiers didn't desert their positions. They didn't run. Historians studying the event are careful to point this out. The men mostly stayed in their trenches and remained willing to defend them. What they refused to do, in growing numbers, was climb out and attack again. The refusal spread from unit to unit with startling speed. By June, disturbances had appeared in 54 separate divisions. Nearly half of the entire French army stationed on the Western Front. In some units, soldiers reportedly marched while singing revolutionary songs, and in a few documented cases, raised red flags, close enough to German lines that officers feared the enemy would notice the collapse. This is the part that connects directly to what we covered last week. The bond that normally makes soldiers follow orders. Loyalty to the small group of men beside them hadn't disappeared. It had simply redirected itself. Soldiers were no longer primarily loyal to the officer giving commands. They had become loyal to each other, specifically, in refusing a command that group had collectively judged as suicidal and pointless. The exact mechanism that makes an army fight can, under the right conditions, become the exact mechanism that makes it stop. The general who understood what was actually broken. Nivelle was removed from command. General Philippe Pétain replaced him. Pétain's response is genuinely worth studying, because it reveals something important about what cohesion collapse actually requires to repair. He did use punishment. Roughly 3,400 soldiers faced courts-martial, and 554 were formally sentenced to death. But only 26 of those sentences were actually carried out. Pétain understood that mass executions would not solve his actual problem. His army hadn't collectively lost its courage. It had collectively lost its trust, both in its commanders and in the idea that further attacks served any real purpose. So alongside the limited punishments, he made structural changes. Soldiers were guaranteed regular leave, some for the first time in years. Food and living conditions in the trenches were noticeably improved. Pétain personally visited units, listening directly to soldiers' complaints, something previous commanders had rarely bothered to do. Crucially, he also promised there would be no more Nivelle-style offensives. Attacks launched with unrealistic promises and enormous, unjustified losses. Within a few months, the French army was functioning again, holding its lines effectively for the remainder of the war. Not because trust had been forced back into existence through fear, because the actual conditions that had destroyed that trust had been directly addressed. Cohesion, it turns out, can collapse quickly, but it can also be deliberately rebuilt, if whoever is in charge is willing to understand why it broke in the first place. The empire that was afraid of exactly this. Now for the stranger half of today's story. Sometimes, The people running an army look at the power of group cohesion and decide it isn't an asset. They decide it's a threat. In 1857, Sepoy soldiers serving in the British East India Company's army in India rebelled in an uprising that came dangerously close to ending British colonial control entirely. British officials studying the causes afterward reached an uncomfortable conclusion. Many of the rebelling regiments had been recruited heavily from the same small regions, the same castes, and the same religious communities. Those soldiers hadn't just been part of a military unit. They had built exactly the kind of tight, trusting bond we described last week. The same bond that held together Roman legions and modern special forces. In 1857, that same bond had been powerful enough to unite an army against its own commanders. The British response over the following decades was remarkably deliberate. They dramatically increased the ratio of British soldiers to Indian soldiers within the army. They disbanded the large majority of the specific Bengal regiments most involved in the uprising, 62 out of 74 Bengal regiments, according to historical records. And most tellingly, going forward, they intentionally mixed soldiers from different castes, different religions, and different regions within the very same regiments and companies. This wasn't a minor administrative detail. It was official, stated policy, designed for one specific purpose: prevent Indian soldiers from ever again forming the kind of unified, trusting bond that had made the 1857 rebellion possible in the first place. The British had learned the same lesson Rome and the Wehrmacht taught us last week. Small group loyalty is an extraordinarily powerful force. They simply concluded that, from where they were standing, they needed less of that force among the men they governed, not more. The same tool, pointed in two different directions. Look at these two stories next to each other, and a pattern becomes clear. Group cohesion isn't inherently loyal to any particular cause, flag, or command structure. It's loyal to the specific people inside the group. When French soldiers in 1917 lost faith in their commanders, that same tight bond that normally wins wars turned directly against the officers giving orders. When British colonial administrators recognized that danger in 1857, their solution wasn't to build stronger cohesion. It was to deliberately prevent it from forming at all. This is the genuinely uncomfortable truth sitting underneath everything we've covered across these two videos. The bond that makes small groups of people extraordinarily effective together doesn't come with any built-in loyalty to the larger institutions surrounding them. It has to be earned continuously by the people in charge. And when that trust breaks, as Pétain figured out in 1917, punishment alone cannot rebuild it. Only actually fixing what broke it can. This isn't purely a military lesson either. Any organization that depends on small teams trusting each other, a company, a sports franchise, a hospital department, runs on exactly this same underlying mechanism. Leadership can either earn that trust, or it can find ways to prevent it from ever fully forming. Usually because a genuinely unified team is much harder to control than a divided one. Both approaches work in their own way. They just produce very different kinds of organizations. If this changed how you think about trust, loyalty, and command, subscribe to Battlepedia and hit the bell for more of this kind of history. Next week, we're shifting from psychology back to tactics, looking at the single greatest mistake invading armies have repeated across 2,000 years of history, and why nobody ever seems to learn from it. Drop a comment below. Do you think Pétain's approach would work in a modern organization outside the military entirely? I read every single one. See you next week.